Today on the Locked On Blues podcast, should the St. Louis Blues trade away Jordan Binnington in the offseason and ride with Joel Hofer? Should they move on from head coach Craig Berube to a coach that more matches their play style? And can they make the playoffs next year if they play up to their potential? I asked you guys on Twitter and YouTube those questions. I'm going to be reading and reacting to your responses on today's episode. Make sure you stay tuned.
Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Locked On Blues podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your number one source for Blues content. I'm your host, as always, Josh Hyman. If you don't know me, thanks for tuning in. I've been covering the Blues in various forms, whether it be writing articles, tweeting, or podcasting for about 5 or so years. I've been doing this show for about 3 or so years. So thanks for tuning in. If you're coming back, if you're a returning listener, thanks for coming back. Thanks for checking out the show. As always, thanks for making Locked On Blues your hashtag first listen. The show is completely free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Also on YouTube as well. Just past 600 subscribers there, so appreciate that. But let's just jump into it. Today is another edition of a new type of episode called Blue or False. A little bit of play on the term true or false. You couldn't figure that one out. I asked you guys 3 different agree or disagree, true or false questions on both Twitter and YouTube. Gave a poll, wanted to see what the responses are, wanted to react to some of your replies and such. If you want to participate in the next edition, make sure you're following the show on Twitter at Locked On Blues or subscribe to the show on YouTube. That way you can vote in the polls and get your responses read live on the episode. But without further ado, let's jump into this week's first blue or false question. And that is, agree or disagree? The St. Louis Blues should trade Jordan Binnington in the offseason and make Joel Hofer the long-term starter. Starting with YouTube, it got 44 votes with about 2/3, 66% disagreeing. They think the Blues should keep Jordan Binnington, not trade him away. 34% agree. Some of the replies, Blondie Girl says, I would honestly give Binner one more year. This year he did very well despite the situation he was given. There were some games he would probably want back, but overall he's had a decent season despite the numbers. If next season turns into another season where we need to rely on Hofer to get through the season, then I would trade him. Albert James said I would keep Hofer as the backup still to let him gain experience. Binnington, regardless of his antics, has a lot of fight in him. Not to mention that he seems to go up a whole nother level in the playoffs. Great point there. Brandon Schletcher, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. A lot of people underestimate Binney. Put a better defense in front of him and he can be lights out. Can't keep giving up point-blank shots from the crease and expect him to stop them all. So YouTube seems to be pretty much in the boat of hang on to Binner. It is not time to move on to him yet. Twitter, on the other hand, has a pretty much identical take. 64 of the 122, or 64% of the 122 voters disagree that the Blues should trade away Jordan Binnington, with only 36% agreeing. However, the replies were a little bit different. The first reply, 100%, they should trade Binnington, no half measures, full fire sale. That comes from Matt Sparks. Chris says, I agree, but for me, it's only about the money. Thomas says, agree, 2 years before the team will be competitive, 3+ to have a chance at the cup. Hofer will be ready to rock. Jake Bishel says, I don't see Binnington as the only problem for the Blues, and moving on from him won't solve the blue line issue. Great point. I think we could see a goalie tandem, sort of a 1A, 1B situation. I agree. Kerry says that's a winning tandem right there, implying they keep Binnington and Hofer. Josh Nees says Jordan is too inconsistent and takes a big cap hit. Send him off. So the votes were heavily in favor of keeping Jordan Binnington, but the replies were heavily in favor of trading Jordan Binnington, or at least a little bit split. So, look, I'm in the boat. I don't think it's time to trade him yet. What Joel Hofer has done has been spectacular. As he makes his 4th consecutive start tonight against the Detroit Red Wings, he is 2-1, only allowing 4 goals in his 3 starts so far, losing in the shootout in his last game. But overall, I mean, he has been everything you could have wanted out of a backup goalie. very, very similar to what Jordan Binnington did for the Blues in 2019, sort of came up from the AHL and all of a sudden lit the league on fire and put in some absolutely dominant performances. Unfortunately, it's a little bit too late in the season for him to do what Jordan Binnington did. I don't think he's going to be able to lead the Blues to a playoff run, minus an absolute miracle. The Blues would have to, win pretty much every single game from here on out, and a lot of teams ahead of them have to lose a lot of games. So, he's not going to lead them to a playoffs run. But other than that, I mean, he has showed a lot of promise for the future. However, I don't think it would make a whole lot of sense to trade away Jordan Binnington for the sole reason that you have a guy in Joel Hofer that you can ride with next year. I wouldn't be surprised to see sort of a 1A, 1B situation like some people mentioned in their replies. I think that would make more sense than just riding with Hofer, because then if you trade away Hofer, who's your backup? You want to keep Thomas Greiss? I don't know about that one. You want to go with another young guy at the backup? I don't know about that one either. I think it makes the most sense to keep Binnington for at least 1 or 2 more seasons while Hofer continues to grow, because don't forget, we have only seen 5, 6 NHL games from him. All in all, obviously he's been great, but there's a decent chance that he sort of regresses back down to the mean and isn't a dominant starter. And, in the later poll, I asked, can the Blues be a playoff team if they play up to their full potential? A lot of you said yes, which means in order to play up to that potential, you need your goalie that's won a Stanley Cup before. If you want to keep the chances of being a competitive team next year, you keep Jordan Binnington. And I think that's what makes the most sense for the St. Louis Blues. However, who doesn't love a good goalie controversy? And I think Joel Hofer is the goalie of the future for the St. Louis Blues. He has proven that in his limited starts, but does that future start next year? I don't think so. So agree with most of you on that one. In this upcoming second segment, I'm going to be discussing whether or not the Blues are capable of making the playoffs next season if they play up to their full potential. That was the next question I asked you guys. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But before I get into that, I want to tell you guys about one of the sponsors of today's episode, and that is Indeed. No matter how the last game went, anytime you take the field or the ice or the court, you've got a shot at greatness. You can give your team the best shot at winning by recruiting more MVPs with Indeed. If you're hiring, you need Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Plus, Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you just need one powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all, and that is Indeed. Indeed partners with you on every step of the hiring process. You can find great talent through time-saving tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. With Instant Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you can get a short list of quality candidates with resumes on Indeed that match your job description. You can invite them right away. Plus, you only pay for the applications that meet your requirements. Start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. This offer is only valid through March 31st. So you only got about another week. Go to Indeed.com/lockedon to claim your $75 credit before March 1st. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. I'll be right back with the second half of today's episode. Okay, so the first segment was all about whether or not the Blues should trade Jordan Binnington. In this second segment, I asked you guys, agree or disagree, blue or false. The St. Louis Blues are fully capable of making the playoffs next season if they play to their full potential. Starting with the YouTube voters, it got 43 votes with a whopping 81% of you guys saying you agree and only 19% saying disagree. Bradley Harvey says they will need to upgrade their defense and get 2 good forwards. I think we are playoff bound. Moving on to Twitter. Interestingly, a very similar ratio once again. It got 60 votes. 78% of you said that you agree. 22% of you said that you disagree. And Blues Cup Champs 2019 says definitely agree. And I'm with you guys. I agree. I think, albeit a small sample size, the last few games under Joel Hofer prove that this team is capable of at least making the playoffs. You look at the standings right now, they're only about 9 or so points out. Obviously, it's a little bit too late to turn it around this season, but they're likely going to end up in a spot that's only, a handful of games out of a playoff spot. And you look back at some of the stretches throughout the regular season, whether it be that first atrocious, like 8-game losing streak that they went on, like in the first and second week of the season, or a couple other bad losing streaks that they've had, or a couple of games that they've blown. I don't think the Blues have played quite as poorly this season as the record would indicate. It's just the lows have been incredibly low, but the highs have been encouraging. When the defense is definitely a concern. I don't think the Blues have anywhere close to a defense that is ready to contend. However, I don't think that they have a defense that is a consistent playoff miss. Specifically talking about Colton Parayko in that instant. Colton Parayko has been a big part of the Blues' success lately. He has been playing arguably like a true number one defenseman in his last few games. He has been spectacular. I talked about him a lot in the last episode, but he has been the guy that we expected him to be and wanted him to be after that cup run. And he isn't really getting the credit that he deserves for it, albeit it is a pretty small sample size. It's not like he's played like this for, a 20-game stretch. It's been like 5, 10-ish games. But that is an indication that he can play that way over a 20, 40, 60, 82 game stretch, being a full regular season. And if the Blues, worst case scenario, don't touch their defense at all in the offseason, which I don't think is going to happen. I think there's a lot of changes the Blues are going to make on their defense in the offseason, hopefully, because they need to. But they have the potential to have Colton Parayko lead the charge and lead them to a playoff spot. Now, like I said, I don't think the Blues have the capability of contending with their current defense, but that wasn't the question. The question was whether or not they could make the playoffs. And I think they're absolutely capable of making the playoffs with this current roster. There was one reply that said they maybe need 2 more forwards. I disagree. I think the forward core for the St. Louis Blues is pretty strong right now. If anything, those 2 forwards are going to come from within. They have a couple of young guys that I think are going to make some noise, whether that be Jimmy Snuggerud, Zach Bolduc, etc. I think the Blues have a pretty strong forward core right now, and I'm looking forward to seeing what that can do next season, especially considering I think they've been firing on all cylinders lately, and that's been encouraging. The only other issue, is goaltending, and goaltending has been pretty solid all season. Jordan Binnington, his numbers aren't great, but I think all in all, he's had a pretty strong, consistent season. Apart from like what one commenter said, there's probably a few games he would want back. But I think he's been solid. And if Joel Hofer isn't just a flash in the pan, if he really is capable of playing this way for a full season as a backup or as a 1B, I think the goaltending is a perfect tandem to lead the Blues to a playoff spot. So I definitely think that they can be a playoff team next season. If the cards fall if the cards fall in the right way, I should say. And if they play up to their full potential. Now, that's the biggest issue, is the Blues playing up to their full potential. It's not just this season. You look back at seasons in the past, specifically 2019. We saw a prime example in 2019 of a Blues team not playing up to their potential. Up until January, whatever, they were last in the NHL. Excuse me. And all of a sudden, the switch flipped. They started playing up to their potential, and they won a Stanley Cup. Not saying this year's team would have won a Stanley Cup if they played up to their potential, but I think we can all agree that they were definitely playing below their potential heading into the trade deadline. You don't forget that the Blues are playing pretty well in their last few games, and that is with trading away Ryan O'Reilly, Vladimir Tarasenko, Ivan Barbashev, Nola Chari, Nico Mikkola, etc., etc. Like, the Blues absolutely depleted their roster, and they're still playing some pretty decent hockey as of late. So, you assume that they have a little bit of cap space to play with in the offseason, that they maybe bring in 1 or 2 more guys on the forward end, whether that be through rookies or free agent signings, and they maybe adjust their defense a little bit. I think the Blues have a really, really strong chance of being back in the playoff hunt next year. And not to mention the fact that they have a couple draft picks to play with, whether they want to pick guys with those picks or trade them away for an instant upgrade. I'm looking forward to it. It is an exciting time to be a Blues fan if you're looking forward to a quick retool, which I think is what's going to happen. That being said, we have one final question to go over, and I'll get into that in the third and final segment. That is, should the Blues move on from Craig Berube? But before I get into that, I want to tell you guys about the other sponsor for today, and that is FanDuel Sportsbook. The tournament is heating up, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores, even threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for the chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. There's still a couple really exciting matches going on. I know Princeton plays, I think tonight, maybe tomorrow. If you want to bet on an underdog, make some good money, definitely check that out. Don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to fanduel.com/locked on. That is fanduel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. I'll be right back to wrap up today's episode with one final blue or false question. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's wrap this one up. We have one final question that I asked you guys. This one was a bit of a controversial one, as in a lot of you disagreed pretty heavily, and I also, spoiler alert, disagree with it. Just wanted to get it out there. Wanted to get one spicy question out there. Maybe you guys thought differently than I did. I said, agree or disagree, blue or false? The Blues should move on from Craig Berube in the offseason to find a coach that is better suited for a skilled/speedy team. Starting out on YouTube, it got 36 votes with a whopping 89% of you disagreeing, only 11% agreeing. Colin says, Berube is a great motivator, and I love the style he likes to play. It is a style that I feel not a lot of teams play anymore, so it gives us an edge and can throw some teams off. I am still a relatively new fan, so I may be missing something, but I don't understand why Army keeps signing guys that don't fit the coach's current system. Interesting. On Twitter, it was even more of a landslide, with 91% of you disagreeing that the Blues should move on with Craig Berube. Only 9% of the 76 voters agreeing. No replies on Twitter. But yeah, look, I'm in the same boat. I don't think it would make any sense to move on from Craig Berube. And that is what Colin said in the YouTube replies. It's perfect. He is a spectacular motivator. Whether or not you agree with his style of play, whether or not, his style of play aligns with what the Blues are trying to do with their roster, I don't think it matters. And I think this season he has kind of proven that he is capable of having some success with a team that doesn't quite match up with what he's going for as a coach. The forward core emphasizing speed and skill a little bit more, whereas he sort of focuses on physicality, two-way game, etc. I think one thing that is maybe making it look a little bit harder for him is the defense. You look at that 2019 team that the Blues had a lot of success with, and you look at that defense, and the one thing that just jumps off the page at you is physicality. I mean, you had Parayko and Pietrangelo, big defenseman, extremely skilled. Jay Bouwmeester was a big dude. Robert Bortuzzo was a big dude. Carl Gunnarsson was huge. And oh God, who am I missing? I know I'm missing someone really obvious, and I'm sorry. But whoever it was a big dude. The Blues had a really large defense, and that made it so difficult for opposing teams, and that played into Craig Berube's style perfectly. I think if you look at the question, why does Doug Armstrong keep bringing in players that don't match Berube's style? I think you should really focus more so on the defensive side of things. Like, there is no player that is the complete opposite of Craig Berube's play style in the entire NHL than Torrey Krug. Torrey Krug is a great player, but if you look at what the Blues did in the 2019 Cup run with their defense, Torrey Krug could not be further from that. They got a lot of goal scoring and production out of their defense, but at the end of the day, every single one of their defensemen was strong in their own end and big and made things difficult and clogged passing lanes. And Torrey Krug is 5'9" and speedy and quick and not that good defensively. I feel like Berube has had his hands full with the defense, and he's done pretty good with it. He's done the best he could, but you look at guys like Nick Leddy and Marco Scandella, and it really feels like the defense lacks a bit of an identity, especially the identity that Craig Berube preaches. So I'm hoping that in this upcoming offseason, the Blues go out and revamp their defense a little bit, get another guy that is a stud defensively, because they have enough firepower offensively, whether that be with the forwards or, the defensemen that do produce offensively. And I think if that's the case, that Craig Berube will prove that he is a much more adaptable coach than a lot of people give him credit for. I think he has shown that with the forward core this year. I mean, you look at, the fact that Ivan Barbashev was a 25 goal scorer last year. That is definitely in part to the way that Craig Berube utilized him and deployed him. You look at the fact that Jordan Kyrou has a 30 goals this year and is over point per game alongside Robert Thomas, alongside Pavel Buchnevich. That shows that Craig Berube can utilize forwards that are a little bit more skilled and speedy than just guys that are, two-way physical beasts. So I think Craig Berube is definitely here to stay for the time being. That being said, that is all the time I have for you guys today. Appreciate all your responses. Like I said earlier at the beginning of the episode, if you want to participate in next week's edition of Blue or False, I'm going to be doing these every single week. You got to follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Blues or subscribe to the show on YouTube, also at Locked On Blues. That way you can vote in the polls, leave your replies. I'll read them live on the air. You can agree with me. You can disagree with me. Doesn't matter. I'll read it up until I get to the point where I have too many replies to read, which I don't know if that'll ever happen. I will read every single one during these episodes. So definitely check that out. You can also follow the show on Instagram at Locked On Blues, and it is free and available on all podcast platforms as well. If you just want to listen to it, you can subscribe or follow me on Twitter at Josh Hyman NHL. Thank you all so much for listening. And as always, let's go Blues.